Hour 2, you're watching CNN. I'm Brooke Baldwin, and in just about half an hour from now, the White House press secretary will be answering questions from the media for the first time in more than 5 weeks. It comes as President Trump told the Wall Street Journal that there is less than a 50-50 chance that new negotiations over border wall funding will succeed. If they fail, that could lead to either another government shutdown in about 18 days' time, or to the president declaring a national emergency to get the money to build his border wall. So let's go live to our chief White House correspondent, Jim Acosta, who will, of course, be in that briefing room momentarily. And so, Jim, it's still stunning to me to see this new report from the CBO that the government shutdown has so far cost the U.S. economy $11 billion.
That's right, Brooke, and that's a dollar figure that is double of what the president was asking for his border wall down on the border with Mexico. Now, some of that will be recouped, according to the CBO, once these federal workers start receiving their back pay. But at the end of the day, there is going to be a big hit to this economy. And I suspect that Sarah Sanders will be asked about that when she has this briefing in about 30 minutes from now. That's the latest time estimate as to when this is going to get started. And as you were just saying a few moments ago, Brooke, it has been a long time since we've had a White House briefing over here in the briefing room. It's been 41 days since December 18th. That was the last time Sarah Sanders had a briefing. That is such a long period of time that we had a government shutdown, the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, in the middle of that time frame. And so there's going to be a lot of questions asked. It'll be interesting to see just how long Sarah Sanders devotes to this briefing. Some of the later briefings that we saw at the end of 2018 were, running on average in the ballpark of 20 or 25 minutes. And so that may go pretty quickly when we see her come to the podium here in about half an hour from now. But obviously the government shutdown is going to be top of mind in that briefing room. Just 18 days to go before the next deadline for a lapse in government funding. And we could be back where we started all over again. And the president, as you said in that interview with the Wall Street Journal, that he's only putting the odds of preventing this shutdown or another standoff with Democrats at less than 50-50. Those are not good odds. And it comes just at the very beginning of this negotiating process with Democrats. And so that obviously is going to come up. Brooke, I think the other thing that is obviously going to come up is the indictment of Roger Stone, which just sort of caused a firestorm last Friday with Roger Stone giving the Nixonian salute as he left the courthouse down in Florida. The president was trying to downplay their relationship over the weekend, saying, well, he wasn't really, near me or near us during the election as it got close to election time. That is something that the president, as kind of an excuse the president has used, or an explanation the president has used with respect to other people who have been indicted in the Russia investigation. He sort of said the same kind of thing about Paul Manafort and others who have been targeted in the Mueller probe. And so it'll be interesting to see just how Sarah Sanders frames all of this. What we've noticed in recent days is that she's just tried to stay away from those questions about the Russia investigation altogether. And one thing finally, Brooke, getting back to the shutdown, Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, really emerged at the end of that process late Friday as somebody who, even conservative allies of the president agreed, had really just sort of taught the president a lesson. And so one of the things that I'll be listening to keenly is whether or not the White House will even admit that they did not come out ahead on this whole standoff over government funding and the wall down on the border. They've been trying to insist over the last few days, and the president did this over the weekend in one of his tweets, that this was not a concession on the part of the president. That is obviously kind of an assessment that is just not dealing with reality. And you and I were talking about some of this on Friday when we were watching that Rose Garden speech from the president. It'll be interesting to see whether or not Sarah Sanders and the White House team over here have truly come back to the real world when she steps out to the podium here in about 30 minutes from now.
Right, the upside down world of which you spoke on Friday. Shout out to Stranger Things. Also be listening for, whether there's a date for a rescheduled State of the Union. All those things we'll be listening for. Jim Acosta, thank you so much. We'll see you in that briefing room in less than half an hour. Meantime, 35 days of partisan bickering. Hundreds of thousands of Americans forced to make desperate choices after going without pay for a month. All of it just driving home a key fact for so many. Our government is broken. And it could be one reason why Howard Schultz, the former CEO of Starbucks, is thinking about making a bid for the White House.
I am seriously thinking of running for president. I will run as a centrist independent outside of the two-party system. We're living at a most fragile time not only the fact that this president is not qualified to be the president, but the fact that both parties are consistently not doing what's necessary on behalf of the American people and are engaged every single day in revenge politics.
While millions may love his coffee, it is a hard pass on his politics. The Schultz news is lighting up social media and sparking fears that, for many on the left, they think his White House ambitions mean that the current occupant, Donald Trump, could stay there for another 4 years. And check out this response. This is from the Washington State Democratic Party, who sent Schultz a 4-word message featuring a twist on the iconic Starbucks coffee cup, quoting, "Don't do it, Howard." CNN national political correspondent Dave Reston is in Des Moines. I mean, it's funny, maybe not so much for him. We should also mention, though, before I ask you my question, you're obviously in Iowa, where a potential Schultz opponent, Kamala Harris, Democratic Senator, California, will take part in the CNN town hall tonight. But I want to drill down on the Howard Schultz news with you first, because he hasn't even formally jumped in the race. Michael Bloomberg, former New York City mayor and fellow billionaire, is saying, no way. Tell me why.
Right, Brooke, so fascinating. I mean, this race has barely started, and this Howard Schultz news is really the biggest earthquake that we've seen already. One Republican strategist was actually describing it to me this morning as the Democrats' worst nightmare. And you saw even Michael Bloomberg, another billionaire who may run as a Democrat, tweeting today, "We must remain united, and we must not allow any candidate to divide or fracture us. The stakes couldn't be higher." So obviously so much pressure coming straight at Howard Schultz just at the moment that he is talking about these plans. He obviously has a fascinating biography, incredible success in the business world, but there are so many Democrats out there, particularly voters that I've talked to, who think that they already have like a pretty fabulous field to choose from, and they are terrified that this announcement by Schultz will mean that he will peel off a lot of independent votes, some Democratic votes, and perhaps make Donald Trump's play to his base look like the smartest political move that he ever made if it's a three-way race. Brooke?
Which is perhaps one of the reasons why it was Howard Schultz and not Kamala Harris that the president took on Twitter, sort of his way of baiting him and saying, bring it. So says John King to me last hour. Come on in. The water is fine. Maeve Reston, we look forward to all your reporting. Loved your pieces from Oakland over the weekend. Thank you. And speaking of, in her bid to be the 46th president of the United States, Democratic Senator Kamala Harris is pulling no punches when it comes to where she thinks President Trump falls short.
When we have leaders who bully and attack a free press and undermine our democratic institutions, that's not our America. We must seek truth, speak truth, and fight for the truth. We will deliver the largest working and middle-class tax cut in a generation. Climate change is real, and it is happening now. From mass incarceration to cash bail to policing, our criminal justice system needs drastic repair. We will secure our elections and our critical infrastructure to protect our democracy. Health care is a fundamental right, and we will deliver that right with Medicare for all. Education is a fundamental right. We will guarantee that right with universal pre-K and debt-free college. And folks, on the subject of transnational gangs, let's be perfectly clear. The president's medieval vanity project is not going to stop them.
Senator Harris' multiracial background, Jamaican, Indian, and legislative record have led some pundits to call her the female Obama. And Harris is quite a bit of company among Democrats eager to replicate the success of the first black president. But my next guest says candidates need to forge their own path if they want to win in 2020. Bill Scher is a contributor, editor to Politico magazine, and in his newest piece, he writes about what he calls the foolish quest to be the next Barack Obama. So, Bill, thank you so much for being on. Welcome.
Great to be here.
So before we get to the crux of your piece on what I was just talking about, out of the gate, you point out how several of these 2020 contenders already have these comparisons to President Obama. So give the audience some examples.
Well, Kamala is the female Obama. Julian Castro is being pitched as a Latino Obama. Beto O'Rourke was called, he's Barack Obama but white, by one of the one Democratic donor to Politico a few weeks ago. Everybody wants to emulate what he did, but it's a much more complicated and chaotic primary in 2020 than we had in 2008. That ended up being a binary choice between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. We're going to have possibly 20 candidates, the most people of color, the most women. People are going to have choices, and you can't just simply fuse the way Obama did, African Americans plus youth plus white liberals, and boom, you got the nomination. It's going to be a much more complicated jigsaw puzzle of permutations that these candidates are going to have to figure out how to piece together.
So on the complexities of this country, of the African-American vote and how you talk about how it shouldn't be treated as a monolithic bloc, I love this line from you. The demographic path Obama chartered in the 2008 Democratic primary is a tantalizing one. Put together African-Americans with young voters and white liberals who live near Whole Foods, and you can send every other Democrat packing. But you say, Bill, that these candidates cannot recreate Obama's 2008 success. Why?
Well, take the African American vote, for example. African Americans voted for Obama 85–90% over Hillary Clinton in 2008. And Obama won a ton of delegates in the southern black belt, South Carolina, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. That was the ball game. His margin of delegate victory was there, and then some. Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders. She got 85–90% of the African American vote in those states as well. And that gave her not the entire margin of victory, but a good portion of it. If that vote is going to split between, say, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Jim Clyburn, who's the dean of the South Carolina Democratic delegation, knows the African American vote in South Carolina very well. He predicts Biden is going to win South Carolina.
But aren't you saying,
even if that's not true?
But aren't you saying, because if you look at the polls you provide in your piece in Politico, it's Biden who has, the biggest numbers when you talk so much about the all-important South Carolina primary, the first majority black primary, and it's those names, Harris, Booker, and Biden. But isn't the point, even though that's the indication now in January of 2019, like so many people are still shopping?
Well, that's it. They're shopping. There's not an automatic place that you can say every black voter is going to go here. There's going to be a much more complicated, and Clyburn himself said, when I talk to African-American voters, what I hear are Biden, Harris, and Booker. And that's just today. Maybe that list gets bigger over the course of the next year and a half. You're right, it's early. I can't take a poll today and say this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But we're at a point where there are choices, and you can't assume that that entire vote's going to go in one place. It might come down to differences in education level and gender and age. I mean, Bernie Sanders won a decent amount of the African-American vote amongst young African-Americans. Maybe he keeps that this time around. Early polling says he's running second with African-Americans behind Biden. Kamala Harris is at 7% in the political poll with African Americans. That's before her announcement. That could go up or down. But if once you have Harris and Booker, maybe also Eric Holder, another African American candidate who could jump in, if no one's going to own that black vote, one candidate gets the whole thing, that Obama coalition doesn't materialize.
Wow, this is going to be absolutely incredible to cover. When you look at obviously what happened in elections past, and you talk about the complexities and everything to look ahead for 2020, what do you think the thing will be, Bill, to spell success for the candidate in 2020?
I mean, it cannot be boiled down to a single issue or even a single philosophy. Some people assume it's going to be who's the most populist, but it could be who's the most pragmatist. We don't know yet. What I think is going to matter most is who understands the complexity of the Democratic Party, not the caricature of the Democratic Party, who can understand the differences in all these demographic subgroups and piece together that winning coalition. Howard Schultz said he's not running in the Democratic primary because they've moved too far left, because they're for federal job guarantees and single payer. Well, not every Democrat is for those things. I mean, it may be the nominee does believe that, but that's not a certainty. He took a crude analysis of the party and decided he couldn't compete. But a Michael Bloomberg, a Terry McAuliffe, a Governor John Hickenlooper from Colorado, even Joe Biden, these folks are not in the Bernie wing, and they may do well. We'll have to see. And the candidate that understands that it's not a one-size-fits-all Democratic Party, that candidate, I think, is going to do the best.
And it's just January of 2019. It's so exciting. Bring it all on. Bill Scher, thank you so much. Appreciate you and your voice and all those thoughts. Just again, Senator Kamala Harris joins Jake Tapper for a live town hall from Iowa tonight, 10 o'clock Eastern, only here on CNN. Moments from now, the first White House press briefing in over a month, so we'll take that live the moment Sarah Sanders steps behind that podium. Also, is Roger Stone willing to cut a deal with special counsel Robert Mueller? Why Stone is now comparing his arrest by the FBI to the raids of bin Laden and El Chapo. And it was the moment that President Trump and Jared Kushner thought, quote, the Russia thing was finally behind them. What Chris Christie is now revealing.
CNN Newsroom.
We're learning today that the FBI raided a third location related to the indictment of Trump associate Roger Stone. So in addition to his homes both in Florida and New York, a storage unit in Florida also got raided. This is happening as his, shall we call it, media blitz continues. Stone spoke with camera crews outside his Florida home today before heading to Washington for his arraignment tomorrow. He also used the opportunity to blast the special counsel after his indictment on 7 felony charges, including witness tampering, lying, and obstruction.
I must say, I don't understand who Mr. Mueller is accountable to. If he's not accountable to the Congress and he's not accountable to the executive, and he has broad authority because our special counsel law has expired, you can see the kind of travesty that you saw last week. To storm my house with a greater force than was used to take down bin Laden or El Chapo or Pablo Escobar, to terrorize my wife and my dogs, it's unconscionable.
The layup of fact checks, the FBI knocked on his door. Let's bring in CNN chief political analyst Gloria Borger and Jeff Zeleny, CNN senior Washington correspondent. So good to see both of you. And as we wait for this press briefing over at the White House in just minutes from now, Gloria, let me start with you. Roger Stone says he has no intention of cutting a deal with Robert Mueller. But the question is, would Mueller even want to cut a deal with him?
I don't think so. I really don't. I can't imagine that anyone would think that Roger Stone would be a credible witness, particularly after Mueller's office has just indicted him for lying, for heaven's sake. So I think what Mueller would like from Roger Stone, and we saw that they gathered more things today from a storage place owned by Roger Stone. I think they want his devices. I think they want his information that he has and his cell phone and his computer and all kinds of things. But I think Roger Stone per se is not somebody that they would want.
On the Mueller probe, Jeff Zeleny, we also just learned that Senators Blumenthal and Grassley introduced this bipartisan bill to require that the special counsel's report be made public. Do you expect some pushback from the White House on that?
I think there certainly could be, because this all along, Brooke, has been something that, the president has done nothing but try to discredit, belittle, demean the whole integrity of this report. So the fact that now you have a bipartisan effort in the Senate, which is pretty unusual in and of itself. There are probably, you can count the number of times on one hand that there's been a bipartisan effort on this topic, with the exception of the Senate Intelligence Committee. So I think it is something that is a bit unusual. We've not yet heard from the White House on this. My guess is that this is not something that they would like per se, because we do know the president was not exactly thrilled with some of the testimony from his Attorney General nominee, William Barr, about A, his friendliness with Bob Mueller, but B, his, a forthrightness, saying that he does believe that most of this should be released. So we'll see where this goes if Mitch McConnell would ever bring this up to a vote. That, of course, is an open question. But this, among with many, many, many other things, certainly could be a topic of questioning at today's briefing from Sarah Sanders.
We are minutes away from that. Jeff and Gloria, stay with me, because as we wait this press briefing, which, again, the last time there was a press briefing, it was December 18th, we want to talk Chris Christie. Chris Christie, and this extraordinary tidbit from his book where he says Jared Kushner thought the Russia investigation would be over as soon as Michael Flynn was fired. Well, we all know how well that worked out. We'll discuss whether President Trump should be questioning the advice of his son-in-law. All All right, as we wait for the White House press briefing and some Q&A with Sarah Sanders, Gloria and Jeff are back with me. And Gloria, let's talk about Chris Christie. So in his book that's out tomorrow, Christie wrote that Trump and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, thought that firing Michael Flynn, at the time the National Security Advisor, would actually end the Russia investigation. And according to the New York Times account of the book, Chris Christie was having lunch with Trump a day after Flynn's firing when he told Trump, quote, "The Russia thing is far from over." And Trump said this to him: "What do you mean? Flynn met with the Russians. That was the problem. I fired Flynn. It's over." And then Jared Kushner added, "That's right. Firing Flynn ends the whole Russia thing." Gloria.
How did that work out?
I mean, a little naive?
I don't think it did. Also, don't forget that Chris Christie also says that Jared Kushner thought that firing Comey was a good idea because Democrats would support it and it wouldn't create the big storm that it created. So, Kushner and Christie don't get along very well because Christie prosecuted Jared Kushner's father. We know all of that history. But I think if you go through Chris Christie's book, one of the threads you will see is that these are people who didn't understand Washington and who were very naive about how things would play out politically.
What about the politics of the shutdown, Jeff Zeleny? Because we know that it's certainly hurt the president. I was reading over the weekend that Mark Meadows says that, building the wall is really key to Trump's base looking ahead to 2020. Obviously, the Mueller investigation, depending on how that goes, could have a real impact on Trump even getting through the primary. And now some Republicans are courting other Republicans to challenge him. How likely is that Trump actually faces a primary challenger?
Well, Brooke, I think that is a little unlikely at this point right here. And I've been talking to Iowa Republicans out here as well, and they aren't thrilled by everything that has been done. But boy, President Trump has done one thing better than almost anything, and that is holding on to his base's support, consolidating that support that brought him to the White House in the first place. So yes, there is some disappointment. Yes, there are a few cracks in there. And I do expect a Republican or two will explore the option of this. And maybe Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland, which is a blue state, and he's a Republican governor. But I think the idea of a challenge for President Trump right now is entirely premature. But we are at the beginning of the year. Who knows what this will bring? But I think going back to the shutdown, there is a sense among Republicans that the breaking point last week, as we know, as we've all been reporting, was that series of phone calls from Leader McConnell to the White House saying, "I am losing Senate Republicans on this. We cannot hold them." I believe that would be the same situation 3 weeks from now. You saw Leader McConnell saying that again today, saying, "I do not believe shutdowns are good." So that is why Bill Shine and others inside the White House, other advisors, are talking to commentators on the right and saying, look, this will be okay. The president could still declare a national emergency. So I would say at this point that is more likely than a shutdown. But again, you have Lamar Alexander saying the president and Speaker Pelosi should stay out of it and allow this conference committee to work. So we'll see how this 3 weeks play out. But I think the politics of a shutdown would be even worse for President Trump. We'll see if he learned a lesson and agrees.
Okay, Jeff and Gloria, thank you both so much.
Sure.
And we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll go to the White House. Sarah Sanders speaking to the White House press pool, answering some key questions. We'll be right back. You are watching CNN on this Monday afternoon. I'm Brooke Baldwin. A promise to tell the truth, an admission that she is not perfect, and a vow to fight for the people. With that, California Senator Kamala Harris took the stage before thousands of her fellow Californians and took the next step in her bid to boot Donald Trump from the White House.
Who are we as Americans? So let's answer that question to the world and each other right here and right now. America, we are better than this.
Someone who agrees with Harris, Howard Schultz, the former CEO of Starbucks. He says he may launch an independent bid for president, something that is not at all going over well with Democrats. And now former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who is himself rumored to be contemplating a 2020 run, is issuing a stark warning to Schultz and really anyone else thinking of going the third-party route. He's basically saying, do this and you will be responsible for re-electing Donald Trump. So we start the show with CNN politics and business correspondent Christine Alessi, who who I know has interviewed the mayor several times recently. And so it's interesting when you read this from him. He doesn't mention Schultz by name, but you know exactly who he's talking about.
Exactly. And he doesn't mince words either. He says we must remain united. We must not allow any candidate to divide us or fracture us. The stakes couldn't be higher. Those are Mike Bloomberg's words. What is different about Mike saying this as opposed to the dozens of Democrats I spoke to over the weekend, because they all knew Schultz was going to make this announcement on CBS over the weekend, and they were all ready to pounce when he did. Yeah. What makes Mike Bloomberg different is that he explored an independent bid for president himself in 2016. And Mike Bloomberg, who I've known for many years, is a data-driven person. He has looked at this backwards, forward, in every which way. And in 2016, he decided that an independent run would harm the Democrats and decided not to pull the trigger on it. And you could bet your bottom dollar that he looked at it again going into 2020, and he doesn't see a path to victory, and neither does his team. And they are the best in terms of data, looking at it, analyzing it. So it's very interesting to see him come out so hard and so fast against Schultz.
Looking at the numbers, and he is saying no dice. Christina, thank you so much. We're going to come back to Bloomberg and Schultz in just a second, and we'll dig into the Howard Schultz saga. But right now, let's go back to the Democrats. Ryan Nobles is in Washington for us, and CNN analysis shows that the Democratic presidential field is the most diverse ever in modern U.S. political history, and there are still multiple people who are rumored to be throwing their hat in the ring. So, Ryan, break it down for me. Who's in, who's out, and who is still to come?
Yeah, the field's only going to get bigger and bigger. Probably part of the reason that Howard Schultz is thinking he doesn't want to get a part of what's happening in the Democratic field because it is so big. Take a look at who's in right now. We know they're running for sure. Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii, she's going to formally announce her bid next weekend. Julian Castro, the former HUD secretary, is in. Of course, Senator Kamala Harris, who we already talked about, from California with a big splash over the weekend. John Delaney's been in the race longer than anybody. He's been in Iowa for quite some time, former Maryland congressman and entrepreneur Andrew Yang. Now let's expand the field a little bit and now talk about exploratory committees, which is kind of a formality. These folks are basically in the race. Elizabeth Warren, she's considered a heavy hitter for Massachusetts. Many progressives wishing she'd got in 2016. Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator from New York, is considered a very serious contender, and maybe on the outside looking in, but certainly getting some momentum, is the mayor of South Bend, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. You talk about the diversity of this field. He is the first gay candidate who is out and proud running in this election for president. That's the first time that's ever happened. Now, let's talk about the potential candidates who are seriously considering this race, and many of these folks are making serious decisions in that respect. Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey, he's already starting to staff up. He's got staffers in Iowa on the ground there. Joe Biden, the vice president's been traveling the country basically for the past 2 years and seems to be heading in that direction. Bernie Sanders, who ran in 2016, he could make an announcement in the very near future. But then you've also got folks like Sherrod Brown from Ohio. He's going to be visiting some of these early states. Michael Bloomberg, who you've talked about a lot. Terry McAuliffe, the former governor from Virginia. John Hickenlooper, who is the former mayor or governor from Colorado. He was actually in Iowa over the weekend. And then, of course, Beto O'Rourke from Texas, who gave Ted Cruz quite a scare in the Senate race last year. Brooke, there's part of me that thinks we almost need baseball cards, right?
Totally.
With all these different candidates' names, so we can trade them, decide who's in and who's out. There's certainly enough candidates here where if we wanted to form a presidential candidate baseball team, we could do that. Perhaps we should just leave these guys, have them stick to politics.
You know, we thought we saw a lot of Republicans crammed onto those debate stages back in 2016. Just wait with these Democrats ahead of 2020. Ryan, thank you so much with all the faces, the baseball cards, as it were. I want to go back to California. At her official launch in Oakland, Senator Kamala Harris not only outlined her platform, she also blasted President Trump and his policies without mentioning him once.
When we have leaders who bully and attack a free press and undermine our democratic institutions, that's not our America. We must seek truth, speak truth, and fight for the truth. We will deliver the largest working and middle-class tax cut in a generation. Climate change is real, and it is happening now. From mass incarceration to cash bail to policing, our criminal justice system needs drastic repair. We will secure our elections and our critical infrastructure to protect our democracy. And health care is a fundamental right, and we will deliver that right with Medicare for all. Education is a fundamental right. We will guarantee that right with universal pre-K and debt-free college. And folks, on the subject of transnational gangs, let's be perfectly clear. The president's medieval vanity project is not going to stop them.
California's junior senator is getting a lot of attention and a lot of praise for her rollout over the weekend. So what sort of pressure does Kamala Harris place on other Democrats eyeing the White House? John King is our anchor of CNN's Inside Politics, and he's with me now from Washington. And so just on that point, you know, Ryan Nobles just ran through all the potential, you know, men and women who want to throw their hat in the ring for 2020. So for people who are thinking about it or on the fence, will the crowd and the goosebumps for a lot of people who felt what Kamala Harris was throwing down in Oakland, might that keep them out altogether?
That's possible. One of the questions you have to make as a candidate in this crowded field is there oxygen for me? Oxygen can take many forms. Are they key staffers on the ground? If you're Beto O'Rourke, if you're Terry McAuliffe. Terry McAuliffe has experience from raising money for the Clintons and being out there as the party chairman, but he's never run for president before. Beto O'Rourke was a House member, ran for Senate. Are there people who will be with me? Is she getting the buzz? Is this the moment to get in? The media is paying a lot of attention. So there's reasons to look at Senator Harris and say, wow, now is the time to get in. There are other reasons to say, wait a minute, key people are being signed up, not only by her campaign, by other campaigns. So the calculation is different for everybody. One person facing pressure is Bernie Sanders. He's run before, but Elizabeth Warren's making waves. Kamala Harris is making waves. Kirsten Gillibrand's out there. A lot of Bernie Sanders supporters in these states are saying, hey, I'm getting a lot of calls. People want me to sign up. Senator, yes or no?
With Kamala Harris, obviously great optics so far. Major test tonight here on CNN before Iowa voters at our CNN town hall. But when you look at the numbers, which I know you do all the time, John King, this CNN Des Moines Register poll of likely Democratic caucus goers shows she places fifth behind Biden, Sanders, Beto O'Rourke, and Warren. And is it a name recognition issue, John? Why do you think she's down in the fifth spot?
Yes, it's a name recognition issue. I suspect if they reran that poll today, because of the Kavanaugh hearings, because of the book tour, because of the big speech yesterday, she'd boost up a little bit. But she needs now, she's done everything right so far. You look at that big crowd yesterday, the optics have been great. She's clearly got a good staff. You have people who can build a crowd, who know how to get media attention. Now she has to meet voters. Now she's got to do the hard stuff, the fun stuff, the stuff that can knock even the best candidates off their game. And that will happen. It will happen, Brooke, to her. It will happen to everybody. You get knocked down in this game. The question is, can you get back up? And when you get back up, how do you do it?
When you listen to her, you know, which she was in Oakland, the amount of jabs at Trump, right? The Vanity Project, the mentioning of the word truth 21 times to the number of times she mentioned Trump, 0. You know, slamming family separation, saying foreign powers are infecting the White House, and adding that she will unite a divided country. Yet today, he actually chooses to go after the president chooses to go after Howard Schultz and not her. Do you read anything into that?
Yes. I read that the President of the United States completely agrees with the Democratic analysis that a Schultz candidacy would help Trump. And he's trying to bait him. He's trying to goad him. He says he's gutless. He says he won't run. He's trying to goad him into the race because the president thinks, yes, it would help him. It also tells you something else, that unlike most incumbent presidents worry about their own reelection and stay out of the other party's fight, the president's going to try to pick and choose and go. He's going to try to stir up the Democratic race. Some people think he's actually going to try to influence the race once he decides who he wants to run against. But without a doubt, those tweets tell me the president would like it if Howard Schultz runs because he thinks it takes Democratic votes away.
So the president's essentially saying, bring it. Meantime, you know, Schultz is blasted on the Twittersphere after announcing that he may mount this centrist independent bid. And a lot of the criticism, as you well know, comes from Democrats who are worried that he will, ensure Trump is reelected by splitting the vote. And we were just talking about the former mayor, Michael Bloomberg, here in New York, saying that he once thought of, running independent himself in the past, that he wrote that, quote, there is no way an independent can win without name checking Schultz. Would, maybe the president thinks so, but would Schultz be a gift to the Trump White House, in your opinion?
It's what the data says. Now, we live in the Trump age. And go back, not just the Trump age. We live in a very volatile time. The country elected its first African-American president. Nobody thought that was going to happen. And Barack Obama beat Hillary Clinton. He beat the juggernaut, right? Then Donald Trump launches what it was a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. Now he's the president. So in the age of Trump, in this age of volatility and unpredictability, is there an appetite? Are there a lot of people out there disgusted with both parties? Absolutely. But the logistical challenge is first. Millions and millions of dollars just to get on the ballot as an independent. Then can you break the loyalty? Most Democrats want to vote against Trump. Most Republicans, even if they're holding their nose, want to stick with their president. Can he win? Can Howard Schultz win? Everything we know tells us no. But was Donald Trump going to be president? Was Barack Obama going to beat Hillary Clinton? So if you're Howard Schultz, you think about it.
Never say never. Howard Schultz on 60 Minutes, he said this about health care.
Every American deserves the right to have access to quality health care. But what the Democrats are proposing is something that is as false as the wall, and that is free health care for all, in which the country cannot afford.
But a Kaiser Family Foundation poll from earlier this month shows a majority of Americans, 56%, support a single-payer health insurance system, often called Medicare for All. So it's not the only way he differs from Democrats, but do you think his stance suggests that he may be out of step with potential voters?
I think his stance suggests he has the CEO approach, and after a decade of disruption and of a decade of every election since Obamacare passed has been about health care to a large degree, Howard Schultz is saying, wait a minute, can we afford this? That's a good question to ask, and it will be a defining question of the Democratic primaries. How are you going to pay for all this? What do you mean debt-free college? What do you mean health care for all? What do you mean all these other, the green new Civil Rights Act and things like that? But here, the question really is, how will health care play? The Republicans learned. They won big elections in the 2010, 2014, running against Obamacare. The Democrats just swept back into the House, running with Obamacare. So health care politics are really complicated. Howard Schultz has a point about the cost. Democrats believe the country's moving with them. Welcome to the campaign. Campaigns should be about ideas. We're going to have a big health care debate.
Can you believe we're already here again? Can you believe it, John King?
Yes. Because of what happened in 2016, because the Democrats view the stakes as so high, because so many people want to run. It's a little early, but bring it on. It's fun.
John King, thank you so much. And we'll all be watching, of course, CNN tonight. Senator Kamala Harris joins Jake Tapper for this live CNN town hall. Again, that is live from Iowa tonight at 10 o'clock, only here on CNN. Coming up next, is Roger Stone willing to cut a deal with special counsel Robert Mueller? What President Trump's longtime advisor is telling reporters today ahead of his arraignment, and why Stone is now comparing his arrest by the FBI to the raids against bin Laden and El Chapo. We're back. You're watching CNN. I'm Brooke Baldwin. Just into us, the FBI raided the third location related to the indictment of a Trump associate, Roger Stone. So in addition to his homes, both in Florida and New York, a storage unit in Florida was also raided. This happening as his media blitz continues. Roger Stone spoke with camera crews outside his Florida home today before heading to Washington for his arraignment tomorrow. He also used the opportunity to blast the special counsel after his indictment on 7 felony charges, including witness tampering, lying, and obstruction.
I must say, I don't understand who Mr. Mueller is accountable to. If he's not accountable to the Congress and he's not accountable to the executive, and he has broad authority because our special counsel law has expired, you can see the kind of travesty that you saw last week. To storm my house with a greater force than was used to take down bin Laden or El Chapo or Pablo Escobar, to terrorize my wife and my dogs, it's unconscionable.
You heard him, bin Laden and El Chapo. After leaving his first court appearance, Stone said that he would never testify against the president. But his tone softened over the weekend when he appeared to leave the door open to testify.
Any chance you'll cooperate with Special Counsel Robert Mueller if he asks?
That's a question I'd have to determine after my attorneys have some discussion. If there's wrongdoing by other people in the campaign that I know about, which I know of none, but if there is, I would certainly testify honestly. I'd also testify honestly about any other matter, including any communications with the president. It's true that we spoke on the phone, but those communications...
With me now, Randall Eliason, a contributing columnist for The Washington Post. He wrote this opinion piece about Stone's indictment. And so a pleasure to have you on, sir. Welcome. And I just want to dive into the crux of your piece. So you write that Roger Stone, that this whole indictment makes it crystal clear that the Trump campaign didn't just happen upon, I think the word you used was freelance, happen upon some WikiLeaks documents.
No, that's right. It's clearly the indictment spells out that Stone was not just doing this on his own, but he was actively working with and on behalf of the campaign. And Mueller has alleged, multiple contacts between Stone and members of the campaign, trying to find out what was coming, what else WikiLeaks might have, when these document dumps might be taking place, things like that. So there's a clear connection now to members of the campaign itself, sort of actively working to see what WikiLeaks had in mind.
So obviously we don't know what the end of this whole Mueller investigation is going to look like, but you play out these two possible end games for the big special counsel investigation. Number one, that they could actually find evidence of criminal conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. Or two, which I want you to outline for us, which is where you say the Roger Stone arrest falls under, which is what?
Right, the cover-up. So, I mean, especially in Washington, people should know that sometimes it's the cover-up that gets you. Stone.
It's not the crime, it's the cover-up.
Exactly. And his political mentor was Richard Nixon, who, of course, was brought down by a criminal cover-up conspiracy. So, yes, Mueller may find this large conspiracy with the Russians. We're all trying to read tea leaves. We don't know what's coming and what else he knows. So that may happen. But another possibility is that he determines that all of these contacts with the various Russians that are now being well documented, they might have been sleazy, immoral, naive, unpatriotic, whatever, but not necessarily criminal. But people lie about them to Congress and to the FBI to cover them up because revealing them would be politically devastating to the president. They undermine the legitimacy of his entire election. So I think it's very possible that when all of this is said and done, there'll be a lot of misconduct, a lot of contact with the Russians that maybe doesn't end up getting indicted itself, but a number of people like Stone end up being prosecuted for lying about that to investigators.
What would constitute conspiracy?
Well, there are a number of possibilities. I mean, one clearest one would be if there was evidence that members of the campaign were actually involved in the computer hacking itself of the Democratic emails, or in actively sort of planning how and when they would be distributed, as opposed to just trying to seek information about what WikiLeaks was planning to do already. But there are other possibilities, allegations that perhaps the campaign was agreeing to do things that favorable to Russia, like changing the platform or offering to ease sanctions in exchange for help with the campaign. So there are a number of other possibilities out there in addition to the WikiLeaks information.
Randall Eliason, thank you so much, sir, for coming on. Appreciate it. And your opinion piece, again, in the Washington Post for folks to check out. The shutdown that could have been avoided before it began just cost the U.S. economy. Now we're up to $11 billion. $11 billion. This is as the president warns of another potential shutdown in just 3 weeks' time. Really even less than that. Plus the Alpha Club dinner. It's this D.C. tradition that is off camera. It's off the record, but we tracked down some of the jokes, from some of Washington's biggest power players that they told over the weekend, and find out who didn't show up.
Tonight, the first major television event of the 2020 election. Senator Kamala Harris, a CNN town hall, live from Iowa. Jake Tapper moderates a Democratic presidential town hall with Kamala Harris tonight at 10 Eastern, only on CNN.
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
The U.S. government may be back open, but the president just told the Wall Street Journal that he believes it's more likely than not there will not be a deal to avoid another shutdown. So it's up to this group of lawmakers, here you go, to figure this whole thing out by February 15th, when the government will run out of money again. The president gave these odds on whether these men and women will succeed, and he said, quote, "I personally think it's less than 50-50, but you have a lot of very good people on that board." And if a deal doesn't happen, the president also told the Wall Street Journal that he will use his emergency powers to get a border wall built. So with me now, our CNN White House correspondent Caitlin Collins. And Caitlin, no denying the shutdown has hurt the president. I was reading over the weekend that Mark Meadows was saying that, building the wall is key to Trump's base for 2020. You have the Mueller investigation. That could have a total impact on Trump even getting through the primary. And now there's talk of some Republicans courting other Republicans to challenge him.
And Larry Hogan.
Larry Hogan of Maryland is at the top of that list.
He is, and that was a name that was tossed around at the Republican National Conference out in New Mexico over the weekend. So that's certainly something that's not being ruled out here at the White House, Brooke, because, of course, the president did take a hit in his poll numbers after this shutdown because not just his base was upset, believing that he had caved to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's demands, but also moderate lawmakers, those moderate Republicans, are frustrated as well because they feel like they just had the longest government shutdown in history, and there's essentially nothing to show for it. Now, it's not even over yet either. We've still got these 3 weeks where this bipartisan group of lawmakers that you just showed are going to try to figure out a way to hash out a deal that not only can clear both chambers of Congress, but also get the president's signature, something that's ultimately going to come back down to those same two people we've been talking about, the president and Nancy Pelosi. And as you noted, the president in that interview is expressing skepticism about the fact that in these next 3 weeks that something's going to magically change and they're going to be able to come to an agreement. Now, the president, Brooke, isn't the only person who's doubtful. Essentially, with these sides drawing red lines, with the president saying he probably wouldn't accept anything less than $5.7 billion, and Nancy Pelosi on camera calling the wall an immorality, it's really hard to see what they're going to come to an agreement over the next few weeks. That is why the White House is keeping as one of their top options the president declaring a national emergency and bypassing Congress to get this wall built. So that's certainly something that they're looking at right now. We do have a White House press briefing, something that we haven't had in a very long time, coming up here today to see maybe if the press secretary, Sarah Sanders, will shed any light on what the president's latest thinking on this is. But right now, it still seems very much that both sides are dug in, and though the fact that this conference committee is a sign of progress, that at least someone is trying to get somewhere closer to a deal, it doesn't seem like they're any closer to making a deal. Brooke.
White House press briefing supposed to happen an hour from now. The last one was December 18th. Caitlin, we'll see you there. Thank you very much. Also, of course,
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
there were big wigs and big jokes in Washington, D.C. over the weekend at the annual Alfalfa Club dinner. The dinner attracts the who's who of Washington politics and business leaders, if you will. Former Secretary of State John Kerry led the crowd with zingers aimed at President Trump, who skipped the event for the third year in a row. So with me now, CNN politics reporter and editor-at-large, Chris Cillizza. And I'll tell you, Chris, I sent a note out to my team over the weekend. I'm like, we got to get Chris on.
Oh, yeah.
Delivering the zingers, because there was no cameras, and so you're that guy. But before we make you do that, that head table was mighty empty.
Yeah, I'm going to do a lot of impressions. It'll be a lot like Rich Little.
Very
okay.
good. Very good.
Yes. Here's the thing. These are people who didn't show up. Now, as you mentioned, Brooke, President Trump, invited for 3 years, has never gone. Okay. But all of the rest, Vice President Pence, Second Lady Karen Pence, as well as Ivanka and Jared Kushner, Javanka, commonly known, none showed up. Now, Pence's office responded to CNN and said he told them he wasn't coming weeks ago, but we don't really know what Ivanka and Jared were doing. Also, notably not on this list, Chris Cillizza was a no-show, mostly because I wasn't invited. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, here's the front table. This is interesting. So you have John Kelly removed from office. Jim Mattis resigned in front of maybe being fired. Rex Tillerson fired. Then you have four cabinet officials, acting Attorney General, Commerce Secretary, Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury. Here's what else is interesting about who was sitting front and center. Mattis spoke. It wasn't a comedy bit. He spoke about the country and service to the country and got a standing ovation. Remember, resigned in protest, Brooke, due to his disagreements with Donald Trump on foreign policy, most notably in Syria. So that gives you a sense of what the crowd was like. Let's go. You mentioned John Kerry is the outgoing president of the Alfalfa Club. Here is a few of his lines. They asked me for his favorite lines, and I picked a few. Donald Trump could be the first president to go to the inaugural of his successor in a limo with license plates made by his campaign manager. Now, that is a reference to the fact that the truth is Paul Manafort is almost certainly going to jail, likely to serve time. I've not been there, but yes, they make license plates. Okay, I'm explaining jokes, which is always super funny. Okay, let's go to the next one. I think we've all noticed there's been a lot of turnover in this administration. Now, this is funny because remember who's sitting in the front row. Ryan Seacrest was fired. Ryan Priebus was fired. Rex Tillerson, General McMaster, Jeff Sessions, all fired. Yeah, and there's more, I think. Do we have more on that?
Yeah. Continues.
One you get to say about the Trump people, they're not quitters. Wilbur Ross is here. This I like. I want to thank him for taking care of dessert. He went to the kitchen and said, let them eat cake. Remember, context, Wilbur Ross said during the shutdown, I don't see what the big deal is. I don't see why they would be going to food banks. Wilbur Ross, a billionaire, worth the context. I think we have one more. Do we have one more? We do. I like all Mitt Romney related jokes. Just think, Mitt and I are two of the only people who understand the temptation to run for office in every state where you own a home. True, Mitt Romney, governor of Massachusetts, now a senator from Utah, has run for president just like John Kerry. Again, I wasn't invited, so I wasn't there. These are the readouts of the jokes. He could have told even better ones, but I don't know, Brooke, so we shall see.
Great job, Chris. Great job. Keep your day job, my man. But
wait,
solid job.
Well, I've already quit my day job. This is problematic.
No. We need to stay right there. Stay right there. It's better
Brooke.
for you. Chris, thank you. Justin, a Republican and Democratic senator introducing a bipartisan bill aimed at making sure the Mueller report is made public. Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, is teaming up with Republican Senator Chuck Grassley, former chairman of the Judiciary Committee, to introduce the Special Counsel Transparency Act. If passed, it would require the Mueller Russia investigation to release the report to Congress and the public. And as Tom Brokaw faces heat for comments about Hispanics and language, a Duke University professor urged Chinese students to speak English. We've got some more context for you and why that is causing all kinds of people to say, what? Plus 41 days. That was the last time the White House held its so-called daily press briefing, and we are expecting to hear from Sarah Sanders at the podium moments from now. Stand by.